somewhat daunted in a room full of construction people talking about technology. I've got to be the oldest person in the room because I started in construction back in the early 60s. I still carry a fountain pen because it doesn't require power, it can't be hacked into, and it's fundamentally reliable. But I do think it's magic. You know, years ago, there was a program came on the TV called Star Trek, with little guys wandering around with little flip phones talking to each other. And I thought that was magic because when I was brought up in the East End of London, we got the first telephone in our street. Today, we take it for granted. We take technology so far for granted that we've forgotten about one of the key aspects of getting anything done. And that's about the relationships that make it work. And just to give you a little insight, yesterday I got a phone call from somebody who's been working for the last 3 years for a government department, doing some very innovative work. So far they have identified £850 million worth of savings. That project is being closed as of the end of March because 2 departments can't agree who's going to fund the £1 million a year to keep the project running. That's where it starts to fail. When you start to think about HS2 as an example and your infrastructure projects, you are not talking about a 2-year build. You are talking about a 15-year investment, which means that the decisions you make on day one and the people who are involved in those decisions will almost certainly not be around halfway through the process and won't even be remembered by the end of the process. And that's just the start of HS2. So I started a long time ago looking at why is it that we don't get collaboration? And how many people today have already mentioned the word collaboration? What does it mean? What did it mean to you? What was your expectation when somebody said we're going to collaborate?
Objectives.
Yeah, but your objectives, his objectives, other people's objectives, these infrastructure projects, and I'll come to it just briefly, are so complex that whilst the technology can inundate us with information and the ability to communicate, you want to know what? We don't communicate. We have all sorts of other pressures on us to make life happen. So, this is me. Anybody ever heard of the Institute Collaborative Working? Good. That's one in the room. That's an improvement on the last time I did this, too. Interesting enough, we've only, as an institute, we've only been around since 2012. As an organisation, we've been around since 1990, set up by Sir Keith Joseph to try and understand how we get organisations to work. Anybody ever read the Michael Latham report on construction? The Egan report? I got pilloried the other day at a meeting of construction organisations when I turned around and said, you know what, after 40 years I haven't really noticed a difference. And people say, oh yes, of course we have, we've done all sorts of things. Well, you haven't. You're still working in a very confrontational, conflict-based environment, which now, when you start talking about smart cities, involves a whole load of people who don't understand construction. My brother was an architect, and one of the things I used to ask him was, what is it architects build into the lintels of buildings that make people switch off their common sense when they walk through the door? And he couldn't answer the question, but so often it happens that the logic that you've been talking about today and the collaboration you've been talking about is absolutely crucial to take you where you want to go. But the organisations you work for, the government departments, the egotists, the politicians, the bankers, the scientists, all of whom have got to work together to achieve the vision that you have need some direction. They need bringing back to the fact that, you know what, the technology is wonderful, but it's people that make things happen. So let me just flash through some of this, because you've seen enough slideshows. This is our view of the world, that we can't change the systems without changing the people, and there's no point in changing the people if you don't change the systems that support them. So, over your careers, anybody been on a team building weekend? Brilliant stuff, isn't it? 2 days going across a field with 2 planks and a yoghurt pot. And at the end of those 2 days, you're full of enthusiasm, pumped up, ready to go. Get to work Monday morning, 10 o'clock, the system implodes on you. The bankers are looking for profit. The shareholders are looking for a return on investment. And suddenly all the vision starts to implode on itself. So I started to look about 15 years ago about why that was happening. And whoops, oh, I thought I'd taken those out. I do apologise, let me get rid of that. Back in how do I go back? Yeah, back in 1998, we produced a document for the MOD called Partnering in the Supply Chain. I've probably got the only copy of it left. Over the years, we've developed a whole load of approaches. But in 2004, I started to look at how do we get collaboration embedded in organisations? Not let's fluffy talk about collaboration. I got accused last year when I put an article out in the Public Sector Executive, I think, with a headline, "Collaboration's the answer, what was the question?" Because everybody's using the term, but nobody really defines what they mean. And the more complex the environment that you create, the more people involved, the variability of expectations goes up exponentially. So we need to start thinking about how do we get stability and sustainable relationships into programs that are going to outlive most of the people in this room. Certainly going to outlive me. You've got a better chance. Okay, so these are some of the people that got involved in the program that we were doing. But I wanted to ask you a question. When you look at your organisation, when you look at your challenges, when you look at developments, you look at the organisations that are involved. And if you bring, I love simplicity. Somebody said this morning, make it as simple as possible. There's a couple of organisations there, I refer to them as donkeys, okay, who spend most of their time pulling against each other instead of considering what they're trying to achieve and what the outcome is. So logically, if we could get the donkeys to sit down and talk to each other, we end up with a solution where we can work together. My view is we haven't got a cat in hell's chance of delivering some of the visions that you've already explained this morning unless we can get the organisations involved to want those visions to deliver and sustain the decisions through the life cycle. HS2, just think about it, 15 years, that's 3 changes of government. Probably every company that's involved in it will have a change of CEO within the first 5 years. In fact, HS2's just changed their CEO and they haven't even broken ground yet. The number of things that are going to change, unless people are working together, they can't stand still. They've got to develop, and they've got to develop in a common way. So I've got a definition here of collaboration. Don't try and read it because it's too small and I'll get sued for damaging your eyesight. The reason I put it up was that definition was put together by 30 organisations, enthusiasts for collaboration. Do you know how long it took to agree that wording? 6 months. That's how variable these kind of situations are. Okay, now, interestingly enough, so we went off last year to talk to Warwick University and we had some research done on why do people want to do collaboration. Really interesting thing came back from a group of senior executives on both sides of the Atlantic. the lowest issue on all of their agendas was lowering cost. They know what the costs are for doing these things, but they couldn't get problem solving because the donkeys were fighting each other, reputations were being protected, there was no trust between the organisations that were involved. Innovation, quite high on the agenda. How do we get innovation when people say, I want you to tender for some work, give me your brilliant ideas. And then when you do, they say, yeah, but you didn't comply with the terms of the tender, so you're not qualified to bid for the work. I've actually seen that happen. Okay, so complexity. Actually, you can join almost every one of those little circles together, but what you have to recognise is there's two things that are getting in the way of combining that complexity. The nature of the organisation and the nature of the people that work for that organisation. When I started in the 60s, I worked in something called procurement, which my mother decided I shouldn't do because she had a different view of what procuring things was all about. I was trained to kill. You know, that was it. Get the best for what we want. Not the best solution for the outcome, but get the best for our organisation. And that mentality, to a large extent, I believe, still exists. The visions, the innovations are there, but self-preservation, the whiffum, what's in it for me, still prevents us from doing what we really can do. The human race is capable of doing almost anything. Technology today, I've learnt, I don't understand it, but I've learnt about it. There's nothing I could want to do that technology couldn't do for me. Just got to get there. Okay, so the world of construction, what a brilliant reputation it has. Overruns, disputes, legal claims, risk, financial problems, lack of return on investment. Half the buildings go up and then they don't get used because it's cheaper to keep them empty than it is to get people into them. We don't want to invest in new technology because there's no immediate return on investment. So we can put all the smart things into the building, but if it doesn't give the shareholders value, we've got to change their opinion of value. Interestingly enough, this thing I think is absolutely wonderful. I have never seen technology like it. But there's a missing factor with BIM, and that is the technology can do what you want it to do, but you've got a little problem. You've got to get everybody in the room with the same mindset that they want to use the technology for the same outcome. The technology will not change the way we do business, it will only enhance the way we can do business. And I think it's brilliant, you know. I watched a program where they showed the sensors on the buildings where they were taking Crossrail 2 through. You know, I'm glad I wasn't in some of those buildings when I saw some of the variations, but, you know, I happened to be on the top of the Twin Towers the day before, and that was, you know, the first thing I did was go out and buy a lottery ticket because I figured if I got down off there, I was on a winner. But so much depends not on our ability to technologically develop these things, but our ability to share information. The comment this morning, discussions around Beirut. I actually spent in the 70s in Beirut, sitting in a hotel by a swimming pool, drinking gin and tonic, listening to bombs go off. You know, people don't talk to each other. We think that's a problem in Beirut. Go down Whitehall and see how many departments there actually talk to each other. And by the time they've made a decision, the ministers have changed and they're going in a different direction anyway. So, why do we want to collaborate? Well, we want better relationships. If we're going to get people to invest, they've got to get something out of it. They've got to move forward. Why did we want a standard? How many of you work to standards? You know? Usually, I try and avoid the use of the word standard because the moment I mention it, everybody's eyes gloss over. All right. What I wanted to try and do was to develop an approach which created a common language, which created some discipline to human behaviours within organisations. So we did that with craft back in 2004. Mad impetuous youth that I was, I got into a discussion with BSI and we eventually turned it into a national standard. You know, first in the world. Everybody thought I was crazy, including my wife. But we got there. We used one of the benefits was we brought together people from different industries. Lots of different views. But what was interesting was that in the main, they all had the same problems. Yeah, they used different technology and, you know, power engineering is different to technology and banking and all the rest of it, but actually the problems are just the same. So we came up with an approach. Okay, so why? Because everybody in the room understand football. Yeah, shake your head, nor do I think. So. Overpaid bunch of guys chasing a ball around the field. But if you think about football, you know, there's rugby football, there's soccer, there's Aussie rules, there's American football, there's union, okay? That's all football. Every one of those has a different terminology, language, culture and everything else. So football was really expensive. Relationships are really challenging. How many of you have in long-term relationships, married? Long-term? 20 years? 30 years? 40 years? Okay, I'm coming up for 48. It's pretty good, I reckon. Being in construction around the world, I've only been home for half of them, which is probably why it's lasted that long. Okay. Relationships are difficult. They're challenging, but they're crucial to where we want to go. So if we had a common route map and a common terminology and some common views, then we could sit down and have those grown-up questions that should take us where we want to go. So that was it. Next week, it gets published as an international standard. I've spent the last 3 years diplomatically moving my way through an international community. Sometimes I think if you wanted to lose the will to live, I recommend you could join an ISO committee. But we got there. This will come out next week. There are now 16 countries involved in taking it to the next level. All right, so that's what it's all about. Not going to worry you, lots of common themes. I just want you to focus on this from what I've heard. What do we want to achieve? How are we going to relate that to our business? How do we understand whether we're capable of delivering our side of the bargain? Do we pick the right partners to work with, and how do we do that? How do we set the governance together that gives us a sustainable model against which we can deliver the outcomes we want? How do we continually stimulate value? Not just what we decided to do yesterday, but what we're going to do in the future. How do we manage that relationship when half the people will move? They tell me yesterday on the radio, I think it is the average person now moves job every 3 years. How do you sustain enthusiasm and commitment and drive if you've got that variation, unless it's embedded in the organisation? And eventually, these all good things come to an end. How do you leave in a controlled way? Nobody ever thought about that with Article 50, because they never believed anybody was ever going to leave. Now look at the mess we're in. Okay, so the life cycle of relationships. So it's not a standard about getting a sticker on a wall. It's about starting to look at how do we do things in a more controlled, systemic way that ensures the visions that you're capable of delivering and the people that are going to deliver them can stay on track for the time it's going to take to do it. Okay, that's me. I just wanted to say, this came out a couple of weeks back. I wasn't able to bring lots of copies with me because we've just had to reprint them all, but if anybody wants to leave me a card, I'll be happy to get one sent on. Thanks for your time, and sorry if it wasn't about technology. I'm a people person. Thank you. Cheers.